Today is Wednesday, and we're looking at Judas. I always have a lot of sympathy for Judas. I think he's one of the characters in the Bible that needed more time, needed us to understand him a little bit, need more sympathy. The church was very quick to just paint him as the bad guy. And for the past 2,000 years, that's kind of the attitude we've had about him. But I think he was so much more. Now, Luke particularly is not a fan of Judas. We saw in the reading a couple of weeks ago when Mary washed Jesus' feet with oil, and Judas was saying, "We'll give it to the poor instead." And there was a sense that he was skimming off the top. So it wasn't really the poor he wanted to help, it was himself that he wanted to help. Be that as it may, I mean, not every follower in Jesus was pure of heart then as they are now. Judas is the one that's got a little more depth, quite honestly. His devotion was not 100%. He had questions. He wasn't completely convinced about what was going to happen and why it should happen, and any of those things we take for granted. And the thing with Judas is that we have to look at him as either a pawn in God's scheme, so he had no choice, or that it had to happen by someone, and he was just the one tempted into it, which I think is probably the more sympathetic way of looking at it. Or we have someone who the entire time was trying to find ways to undermine what was going on, which, again, maybe we don't know. We don't know enough. All we know is this person is absolutely instrumental in the switch from the early part of the week where everybody's excited about Jesus being there and the end of the week when they're ready to crucify him. Judas is our pivot. And I think Judas needs to have more of our time. And as we talk this week about turning the tables, who is Judas to us? I think it's a very, very important question. Where do we match up with where he might be? Which part of the options, that he was a pawn, that he was intentional, that he was happenstance, really resonates with all of us. And you don't have to have an answer for life. You can have it for this holy season. I think it's really interesting in Luke's telling, where already we don't have a high opinion of Judas to start with, because right from the beginning, there's no sense of subtlety in Luke, rather. The writer is right from the beginning talking about this is the one who betrays Jesus. So going in that you're supposed to look at him as the bad guy. There's no other option. But something the writer does in the passage we're looking at today is very telling. He says, temptation entered Judas' heart. Now, we saw temptation at the very beginning when temptation challenged Jesus. In the Bible, it will say Satan, it will say devil, it will say a whole lot of things. Again, the Hebrew Hasatan means temptation. It means the trial, bringer of trials, the one who is going to push and test whoever the person is. And we're so excited when we look at the temptation of Jesus in the desert, that Jesus is able to withstand all of this whispering in your ear. But we know that we don't withstand that whispering in our ear. That's Jesus level stuff. Regular, ordinary humans, we get tempted all the time. And that's where I think Judas needs a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of a birth. Because we're told he is challenged by temptation and he succumbs to it. What that temptation is, we're never really told much about. But it's not the money. This is one thing we do know for sure. He's not being tempted by the money. That comes afterwards, where the Pharisees say, okay, great, and give him some money, and he takes it. It wasn't part of the original deal going in. And I think that's very important as we hold on to that today as we're looking at Judas and his absolutely important role in this entire process, because Judas is us. Judas is all the people who were disillusioned. Judas was the people who were at Palm Sunday, waving hosannas, waiting for the king. And Jesus wasn't doing that. He'd spent the last day and a half in the temple teaching people. He wasn't out rallying folks. He was waiting for people to come to him in the temple. Jesus didn't leave the temple. That's where he was situated. Even the followers who had been with Jesus on and off for 3 years would have had in the back of their minds the expectation of someone coming to take over, or the fear of someone coming to take over. because they'd had the history of being able to kick out the Greeks, but they also know the Romans were much fiercer, and they had not been able to kick out the Romans yet. Judas succumbed to temptation. Such a simple thing, such a hard thing to get beyond. We're not told anything else in this story of Luke. We're not told, like in Matthew, how Judas went out and committed suicide. We're not told, like in Mark, that Judas was intrigued by money and satisfaction that he had been disenamored with going on. All we're told is that Judas was tempted and went to the Pharisees and said, "I'll help you get him." You know, it could have been from a good place. I'll help remove him so we don't get the disaster that he's been predicting. We don't know. It could be from a very malicious place. I'll help you remove him so that he will not become as powerful as I think he might if he gets killed. We don't know. And I think that's one of the really important things with Judas, that we have to keep him an open-ended character. It is way too easy in this story to just write him off as the nasty Judas who is responsible for Jesus' death, because ultimately he wasn't. If it wasn't Judas, it would have been something else. The priests have been looking the entire time to try to find a way to get Jesus and get him out of the way. How long? I mean, the city was surrounded by Romans at this point in time. It was Passover. It was one of the main feasts in the Hebrew year. Everybody was coming from all different directions. It was a scary time for anybody who wanted authority because they didn't know what was going to happen. Judas just happened to be the one. But the Romans had picked up on it sooner. We could have had a different ending to the story because ultimately they were the ones that betrayed and killed Jesus. Judas, he was the vehicle. And Judas could be anyone. As we turn the tables this week, how are we like Judas? And why is Judas such a horrible character in history, and yet Peter, who also denies him, given a pass? What is it specifically about Judas that we don't like? Is it the money? He didn't ask for it, at least not as far as Luke told us. Spend some time with Judas. He probably is a bigger window on our faith story than any other character in the New Testament.